Hey everybody, it's Holly from Holly's Pandorium, and I have a very favorite guest back. This is Nathaniel Gillis. I'm so glad to see you, Nathaniel.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, and you're one of my favorite people in the field as well. And I'm sure we're going to have a great time again.
Yeah, so Nathaniel has a tendency to be referred to as a demonologist, and he is a paranormal researcher, and he's done a lot of things in the field of demonology research, but that's not really how you think of yourself. Can you explain that, Daniel, please, for people watching and
Yeah.
listening?
So essentially, what occurred was I went on a radio show, and it was my very first introduction to the field. Like nobody knew of me, and they asked me what I was researching, and I told them. It's like, okay, how can we characterize you? What are you? It's like, okay,
Right,
religious demonologist.
right.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is my very first show. And so there I am with like 3.5 million people listening, and it's Nathaniel Gillis from Steve Knowledge.
Right.
So from that moment on, I was like, okay, do I want to lean into this? Do I want to lean out of it? What do I want to do with it? So that being said, my work has been centered around demonology of the ancient Near East, and especially right now in modernity, what we're dealing with, what kind of life forms they were, their characteristics and behavioral patterns. But as of late, I've realized that at least the model of demonology I inherited from the evangelical movement is flawed in its data set. I've encountered case studies in my own career where whatever some of these entities are, they're not the actual demons. Like if there were demons that existed, right? They're not
Right.
them.
Right.
They're seemingly a form of practitioner where they're using their own sigils against our species. And I've actually had photographic evidence where some of them are coming underneath the skin of the surface, and they're cross-cultural and interreligious stuff that you would not see, on like the History Channel, right? Because it's one
Right.
tradition. This is kind
Correct.
of combining them all, and they are practitioners. And one thing that has kind of blown my mind as of late is like, okay, why are they doing that? I mean, if we're still stuck in this dogmatic model of the phenomenon where we believe, okay, these practitioners are doing what they're doing to employ deploy these beings, right,
Right.
to pull them down and to manifest amongst us. What are these beings doing this for? What benefits them? And so it's almost like it kind of enlightened me in the fact that there seems to be at least another dimension of influence,
Right. Because
in that
that's
it's
that's kind of the
what.
point. So
Yeah.
from Nathaniel's research, just to catch everybody up. So most of us have a tendency to either a dismiss demons completely because we
Mhm.
just choose to not believe that they exist, or we tend to entertain a theological view of demons and consider them as evil in origin, originating from Satan in some form or another, and having ill manners and ill intent for every interaction. That their entire goal is to just make our lives miserable or make us sin and become evil in some manner. And what Nathaniel has discovered is a whole nother zip code of this. It's
Yeah.
not it's not what we're used to. It's not what we're familiar with necessarily.
Right.
It's very much fringe areas, and yet there's a lot of people that are in agreement with Nathaniel and believe that there's a lot more to the story. So not only is this a real subject, this is a real science, and there's evidence leading myself and many others to kind of go, oh, wow, this is really not what I thought at all. This is very
Totally.
different. And so, what Nathaniel's describing is a whole nother concept. So, if you're following along and you're getting a little like, what? I'm not
Yeah.
sure I understand, it's okay. There's a reason why you might not understand some of this because it's very different than what you're used to thinking. So, we're going to ask you to stretch your imagination a little bit with this episode and consider that something else might be going on that you're not even aware of.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And
Yes.
yeah, some of the latest research I've been doing is monitoring the many ways this phenomenon has manifested as archetypes.
Right.
Not as if, right, okay, yeah, is it a demon? Okay, well, can we follow the historical record? Was that ever a demon? No.
Right.
but it's trying to mask itself as that.
Okay.
And one of the things that I've been doing as of late is like, okay, I do have a history in not academic, but linguistics. So I grew up studying Hebrew language in eschatology. And so even some of the evidence being collected with paranormal research, you know, 666 carved into a wall, where
Hmm.
the phenomenon wants us to believe,
Right.
oh, I'm horns and hooves, until you ask them, okay, what is this? And they can kind of unbox that entire concept.
Right.
And then you're like, wait a minute, so that was never about demonology. No, it wasn't. Then why would it want us to believe that?
Right. Why
It's
would it send us in that direction?
absolutely. And that is why, again, leaning into archetypes, because it's almost like a series of stages where the phenomenon will manifest as the archetype in order to inspire a predictable response out of the experiencer. It's fascinating. It's in some ways it is like artificial intelligence. And to go even deeper, I'm working with a couple people who have guides, and their guides also overlap with their UFO abductions.
Interesting.
And what we're seeing, even with, and I always mention him because I'm going to be on a show again here soon. He's a great guy. Ted Rice also said this, where it's like, yeah, they're my guides up until I start remembering some of my abduction accounts. And then when they go back to the guides are eerily silent. Why? That right there is alarming because again, if they're incarnating as the demonic archetype, what's to say they're not doing that with the guide as well?
Right. So can you
Where
give us an example of what you're talking about?
yeah, yeah. So for instance, if the experiencer says, okay, you know, like specifically like Ted Rice, he is a psychic medium and he goes through his entire adulthood, right? He's a very gifted psychic medium. He has a group of psychics that he's training, he's arming the next generation. And then he starts going through PTSD. What is this?
Hmm.
Never had these symptoms before. Then he goes with Dr. Carla Turner to Barbara Bartholic. He undergoes hypnosis.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, these memories that were lodged in his subconscious start erupting out of nowhere. And so now he's thinking, oh, okay, great. I'm going to my guides because my guides have had everything to say about my life,
And
right?
clearly they'll have some input.
Absolutely. And then he goes back to them and they're no longer there. I'm telling you, that is alarming to me. Oh my God. Because again, it's almost like one program was superseded by another. And that stage of incarnation was done, a new stage began. And now it's okay, yeah, we're alien. So the thing is, even within the alien archetype, it still falls apart because we're having case studies where they are manifesting alongside of ghosts, they're manifesting alongside of demons
Okay.
and guides. And obviously, the obvious question would be, okay, are they all coming from the same source?
Hmm.
Is this a singular intelligence that it's manifesting as different archetypes so as to remain completely hidden to our species? And so that's been my approach. You know that more than most, my friend. It's been my approach because I realized, okay, forget the mask. I want to know what they're doing. And one thing that has been synonymous throughout the entire model is that there's something to do with the posture of worship, with altar building, with
Right.
ritual sacrifice. That is not just an interconnectivity uniting case studies of demonology, the archetype, but
Right.
even with ufology, there is that thread. In a lot of people will hop on that bandwagon and say, "Well, Nathaniel's saying they're demons." That's not what I'm saying. I mean, that would be easy, right? Because at least we can
Right.
quantify that. Throw some holy water, have a nice
Right.
night, take two of these, call
Right.
me in the morning. That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is the archetype itself is designed to make us believe they follow a series of rules, and they don't. And even the practitioners right now in every major mystery school, anything that they're being given is almost, it's obviously working, but my point is whatever they're operating is transcendent. And they're actually, and here's something even perhaps more interesting, is I'm collecting evidence now that not only was this phenomenon present in antiquity, but it was curating the human condition. Where in northern Syria, there were practitioners who were building altars, but where were they building altars? Oh, they're building it in the desert within the proximity of the phenomenon.
Okay.
And so I'm doing some research on what are called the Rephaim. Um, but the Rephaim taught these practitioners that if you do not build an altar for us at this specified location, we will deploy and weaponize ghosts and demons to get you back in line. So, what does that point to again?
Right.
Mm,
And I want to just
it's-
stop really quick for
yeah.
a second, Nathaniel. What listeners and viewers may or may not have ever thought of in your lifetime, if you've ever wondered, why does a demon act like it does, or why does a spirit do what it's doing? This is what Nathaniel lives for. This is what
Yeah.
he's breathing and thinking every day, all day. So he doesn't just want to deal with things that are messing with us. He wants to know where they come from, why, how, when. He wants to answer all the 7 whys and figure out what's causing this behavior, and can we do anything about it? Can we stop it? Because he's actually found links through different suffering of others to figure
Mm,
out what's causing it and what seems to be similar, where people that have been abducted, people that have been molested, there's all these different links that connect people that have suffered at the hands of what seems to be a demon, and maybe it's not. And that's what he's talking about, is
correct.
what else is going on here. Okay. And
Yeah.
so
God, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head, my friend, and you're right. And if I were to kind of encapsulate all of this, when we're researching demonology, it's almost like we're profiling a serial killer
Hmm.
because, or multiple, or
Right.
one that masquerades as others. Because I had a case study where it's an incubus where he was it was obviously stalking the wife. So when I got there, it would wait until she goes to bed at night and it would crawl into bed with her
Hmm.
where she is in. Yeah, you can see the indentation of the
Hmm.
bed as it's physical moving in. It's crazy. And so when I got there, I was talking to the husband and the wife, and we had our meters out. So we had technology present.
Right.
And I could feel from my right side, I could feel an atmosphere change, and it kept getting closer.
Right.
And it felt violent, like it was angry that I was there.
Of
And
course.
all the meters go off, and I look at the wife, and I kid you not, she's at the dinner table. We're at the dinner table drinking coffee.
Hmm.
She's white knuckled grabbing the table, and she's
Yeah.
shaking so hard you can hear the dishes clean. Ding. And
Oh.
so I'm talking to the husband, and the husband tells me, he's like, Nathaniel, you seem to be a good guy. You know what you're doing, and he goes, but I don't really believe in this.
Right.
This is in the earliest stages of the investigation. So I don't believe in
Right.
any of this. I
Right.
want you to know. He's like, but if my wife is afraid, even if it's not real, I want to be there for her, and we'll get through it.
Smart.
So yeah, right. Yeah. So that was the first time we went and investigated. The second time, which is about a month later, uh, I walk in and half his face is, yeah, it's just black. And I'm looking at him, and he didn't make an obvious or anything, but I start talking to him about what's going on. And I'll tell you what, even before I entered the house, I had scheduled the time, messaged them, and it's an old house, like 100 years old, 20 years old. It's all wooden exterior. It's beautiful. But anyways, I'm looking at them through the window, and they're watching TV, eating dinner, and they're looking at me. This is nuts. Craziest thing I've ever seen. And I'm waving at them. I'm banging on the door. Nothing. Banging on the door. Finally, I'm there for like 20 minutes, and it's like 20 degrees outside. It's in
Yikes.
Ohio in the wintertime.
Burr.
Finally, I call them. Hey, Nate, you coming? You on your way? No, I've been outside the entire time. Really? Go to the door and on the door. Yeah. You didn't hear me? Not at all. Did you see me? Not at all.
Wow.
Yeah. So I knew at that point, yeah, the phenomenon is circumventing, if not pausing, entire laws. to where it tries to push us back and stop us from looking too deeply. But with that said, so I'm in there talking to the husband. I notice again half of his face is paralyzed.
Hmm.
And I asked him, I said, like, have you been having any more paranormal activity? He goes, absolutely. He goes, now I believe it. So what happened? And he said, well, he said, my wife, it was the weekend, my wife goes to bed. She gets up on Monday before I do. So she goes to bed before I do. He's like, you know what? I follow her in there and I lay down. He goes, Nathaniel, he said, we're laying down. She's trying to fall asleep, but I'm paying attention because I don't have to go to bed and go to sleep till later on, but I'm watching everything. He said, out of nowhere, there's something steps on the bed. And he said, it starts crawling up between my wife and I. And he said, I can't see it, but I can feel it brushing up next to me. He said,
Spooky.
like, really? Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he said, next thing I know is my wife's hair starts twirling. He said, then my feet, he said, I feel something near my feet. And he said, and the answer's obvious, but it was almost like he wanted to hear me say it because he didn't want to believe it was real. He said, what do you think it's doing? I said, well, I think it's crawling in between you and your wife.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And he said, well, he said, I got very angry. And he said, I watched a paranormal show on TV.
Uh-oh.
And they taught me rather what's called the rite of provocation, which is virtually, don't do it.
Hmm.
You just say that. And so he said, I provoked it. I challenged it. And I told her,
Big no-no.
absolutely, yeah. And so he said, nothing happened. Everything was fine until he went to bed, fell asleep. And in the middle of the night, he said it felt like something crawled on top of him and was beating him. And so he said the next morning, that's when he woke up. He had partial paralysis or what's called Bell's palsy.
Right.
Went to the hospital. They started documenting just his injury. And I said, okay, have you been in an altercation? No, why? Somebody has pummeled your head like you have head trauma. And he
Crazy.
never told them what's going on, but he told me. And so, anyways, while I'm going through my notes, I'm noticing these different behavioral patterns
Right.
that I've had in other case studies with Ikigai entities. And I said, okay, is there a specific time of the year this entity shows up?
Right.
They said, yes, in late October, every
Interesting.
year, every year. And so that would mean it's either a program, which is fascinating, right? It's set
Right.
on a timer where it manifests and it leaves,
Right.
or it's an entity that's revisiting crime scenes or its favorite victims,
Right.
and he shows up, right? It's like a trucker. Okay, I've been out for a week, but now I'm back.
Right.
And that's why I'm suggesting that, obviously I encourage paranormal research, but I
Right.
also encourage being cautious
Absolutely.
because
100%.
we don't even know what these entities are. I mean, sure, we have ideas, but their abilities to not just manifest, but to manipulate our species is unlike anything I've ever seen.
And I think that's I appreciate you saying that because whether you believe in it or not, what regardless of what you think it is, if someone is experiencing a harmful situation, the last thing you want to do is challenge it, number one,
Right.
because you don't really know for sure what it is you're dealing with. You can't even see it. So how can you quantify its strength
Right.
and or influence? And so
Mhm.
I've said this before, and I'm glad that you're saying it because I'm going to keep saying it. There's a lot we don't understand, and there's a lot that we don't know, and it's a
Right.
fool to assume that the righteous indignation idea and concept is very
Yeah.
understandable, and people do have a spiritual authority over their homes, but if you don't know what it is you're dealing with, then you shouldn't assume
Oh,
that you
yeah.
can address something you don't understand any way you want.
Yeah. Very well put, my friend. Very well put. Yeah. And again, it is like a serial killer because it's not. We've seen some of this demonstrated in the pathology of serial killers. Where it's not okay. They don't know morality.
Right.
Many of them know the difference between right and wrong. That's what makes them do what they do. They
Right.
know it's wrong. They know it's
Right.
disgusting. And so, yeah, some of these entities, they do mark their victims like serial killers. Matter of fact, Father the Destroyer of Amino was researching incubi entities, and his case studies included victims who not only suffered physical harm, but they would wake up and they would have sigils underneath their eyelids, symbols
That's
that
incredible.
whatever these things were had carved under. So every night they would go to sleep,
Hmm.
not realizing that they're making eye contact with a
Wow.
symbol belonging to a specific entity. And then I kind of go into this. It's like, okay, well, why would they mark the body?
Right.
It's not for us because we don't recognize that. Like, I don't know who that belongs to.
Right. And
It
why
would,
would
it,
you ever look there? What,
right.
who looks inside their
Oh
eyelid?
my, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's very strange, but I think
Right.
that's kind of the point, you know. I mean, and to that degree, it's not just they marked underneath the eyelids, but they would mark the bodies in areas that were always clothed.
Right.
In matter of fact, one of their most interesting pathologies to me is that as culture evolved in their fashion,
Hmm.
right? Okay, I wear shorts and short sleeves,
Right.
where in times past the phenomenon would mark them because they wore pants and long sleeves. Well,
Right.
now it's evolved. Now they're changing the
Right.
location of the symbol.
Mm.
And in some of my work dealing with serial killer pathology, I've seen that same modus operandi in that they're not just marking the body for themselves. They're marking it for other entities who are doing the same things they are.
Interesting.
And to go even deeper and perhaps even more disturbing is that some of these victims did die, and some of them from attacks, but most of them not. But those who did die,
Right.
they had the markings, and so one demonologist hypothesized that they were being marked, so the victim would follow and say, "Okay, after they're oh, that's my body, right?
Okay.
That's my victim." And
Okay.
this pathology is incredibly disturbing
Yes.
because it's almost like you have Hannibal Lecter who has foreknowledge
Yeah.
and knows a part of our species that at any moment it can access and weaponize memories, archetypes. And so where I'm at now in the field is okay, we have to realize that not everything that appears love and light is. And if it's not, how do we vet it? How do
Right.
we
That's an excellent
pull
question. Well, and that's why I'm really glad that you're doing the research you are, because there's so many people engaged in paranormal research right now, and there's not
right?
a training that covers this. There isn't very many people that are specializing in understanding this stuff. So I want to jump over to your trip to England, because I think
Yeah.
that I'm curious, and you shared a tiny bit before we started talking online, but I really am fascinated because there's so much more history in Europe,
Mhm.
period. The culture's
Right.
been around longer than the United States, and I'm fascinated with the history and the long histories, the long memories of so many different cultural interactions with these types of things and what they come to assess. So what did
Mhm.
you learn in England? You went now, please explain
Well,
to everybody
yeah.
what were you doing in England? What happened? How'd you get there?
Yeah. So I have long been a fan of Paul Sinclair, Steve Mera, and Dr. Barry Fitzgerald. I think they're the best researchers in my
Mhm.
mind. No offense to anybody else. It's just because, and it's not just because they're good at the research, but it's the same vein of work I'm in, right? So they're
Right,
kind of in that same niche.
right.
And so I've been following their work now for a long time. And then I became good friends with Paul Sinclair. Was on his show. We hit it off super well, incredible. And so, yeah, out of the blue, I get an email. And it was, "Hey, Nathaniel, we would like you to join us at the Awakening in Manchester in February." So I'm going, oh
Nice.
my God. Yeah, like I get to meet my heroes. I've never been to
Right?
England. Like, this is a huge deal for me. And
Right.
so, sure enough, I land in Manchester and I fly out. I meet all the above, you know, Barry Fitzgerald, Steve Merritt, Paul Sinclair. It was fascinating, you know. I mean, number one, I had to know what stewed peas were, or mushy peas is what they're called. I've
Okay.
never had that. I've never had that, so I had to like educate myself. Like we were eating fish and chips, and what's that? Mushy peas. I'm like, all right, like, we don't have that. But other than that, it was incredible because I mean, we're talking about the phenomenon for 2 hours just over coffee, and what do
Right.
you think about this? And you know, and it's shocking to me how much of our work is so much alike.
Oh yeah.
And they're obviously older than I am. I mean, a lot of them, most of them have been in the field longer than I've been alive.
Right.
So it was a distinct honor to be with them. Uh, but there were some conversations that were had, and some of the phenomenon, at least the practitioners, whatever these entities are,
Right.
they don't ask for worship; they demand it.
Yeah.
And that particular characteristic, it's primeval. And if in fact that is the correct model of the phenomenon,
Hmm.
that's what Jack Parsons said. That's what Aleister Crowley taught us. That's what Linus Levi,
Right.
and before him, Brahma and May. I mean, you're right, all the esotericists and all that. Anyways, my point being, if that is the model of the phenomenon, wherein yes, we will give you technology as long as you build an altar for us, then
Right.
now we have the ability to track those bloody footprints, right? Like a profiler. Where
Right.
did we hear that first?
Right.
Modernity. People want it to be the case, right? Oh, well, we're materialists. We want it to. It's not true. This was
Right.
happening in antiquity. And in these same entities, and the same entities that are courting the human condition right now,
Hmm.
we're doing the same in northern Syria. The very same thing. And so then it's like, okay, well, what are they? Well, some of them want to appear as deities. They want to appear as gods to us. And some of this is also why many experiencers, even one of the most famous ones right now, working at the Pentagon, when some of these beings manifest, they inspire a holiness.
Of course.
And people don't realize that. They want to, oh, well, it was cool. No, that was what we would call transcendence, holiness, otherness. Um, yeah. So, in doing that, though, many of them will require something. And
Right.
it's that requirement that has piqued my interest. Because sure, we could talk all night about our technological advancements. That's great until it's not, right? So we actually have to answer the larger questions. Why are they wanting blood rituals?
Right.
What's going on here? Why is it that they're like, I think about 30% of serial killers are doing what they're doing for an entity that's telling them to?
I have heard that several times, and I find that fascinating. That
That
they don't
scares
have
me.
control of their own thoughts, and that something
Mhm.
impedes their thinking, and they obsess over an act to do
Yeah,
something over and over again. And it's always been labeled as madness, or a mental illness, or
mhm.
trauma-induced response.
Right.
There's a lot of history that tries to explain the unexplainable. Because what would
Mhm.
make anyone want to do those things? Why would
Right.
anyone go there? And so that's a really valid question. So in dealing with these other investigators in England, did you come to some real common ground that you felt like you guys were
Absolutely.
okay? So what did you assess? Now what if different parts of the world are having these attacks, let's say, or these incidences of an other energy that's not kind, that's
Right.
definitely out to cause havoc and destroy people's lives. Do we have a consensus at this point of what
Oh my God.
what
So
what are they, or what why? I
there we
guess.
go. Those are the more profound questions. Yeah. I mean, I'm personally getting bored with the extraterrestrial hypothesis
Right.
because we're contacting them through seances.
Right.
Like I know of one experiencer that's performing necromancy
Oh
just to
wow.
contact aliens. And let's put it where it's at. The aliens aren't correcting them. My
Okay.
friend, they're not stepping in and saying, hey, listen, I know you think, right, I'm a ghost, but
Right.
I'm not. They're not doing that.
Okay.
Likewise, and yeah, again, the archetypes. before. Okay, yeah, well, I'm talking to demons, and yeah, they're showing me all this technology out there. Well, they never bothered to correct them. Very weird. And so, one of the biggest things that I'm looking at now is because we were talking about ports at one point, and what struck me the most is a case study where Steve Mayer's case study, where the phenomenon had taken a coffee mug from the house, and the family noticed it. It's gone. I
Hmm.
guess it came in this like a set or a box of them, and one of them was missing. And so, out of nowhere, at a place that they've always been looking for it, right?
Hmm.
It manifests, and it looks exactly like that cup. This is fast. This is why I love Steve Mayer's research. It looks identical
Okay.
until he goes in the laboratory, starts investigating it, and it's not the same mug. It's not the same. So when we're discussing this, I'm going, I started melting down because I'm like, wait a minute. Because I start realizing the various nuances here that have profound implications. Now, that would mean the phenomenon is introducing simulants into our
Right.
world.
Right.
And the reason it's not a beer mug, right? It's not they didn't replace the coffee mug with a beer mug, is
Hmm.
because that would capture our attention. We would
Right.
notice that there's a tear in the fabric of our reality.
Right.
And so when people want to say, oh, it's disclosure, well, time out. They have every opportunity to, right?
Hmm.
They could abduct a blonde woman and replace her with a woman with black hair,
Right.
but they're not. And so when we're looking at their intentions, it was almost as if we want to maintain and manage your perception of reality. We do
Right.
not want you to know what we're doing.
Right.
So we'll take and we'll replace. Now, what is this? A lot of this, again, unfortunately, falls underneath occult transference.
Okay.
And we've seen that particular behavioral pattern, not just in ufology, not just in reports, but even in malevolent hauntings, where like there's one case study I know of where the family moves into a really old house, they have a child, and a malevolent presence manifests. Next thing you know, some of his toys are missing. They can't find them. They look everywhere, could not find them. Underneath the stair was a cupboard. Opened it up, not a cupboard, it's I forget what they call it, closet. But
Okay.
anyways, they walk in, you turn the light on. There's all of his toys.
Okay.
None took. And so when I'm sitting down and I'm pouring over copious amounts of case studies, and I'm thinking, okay, why is it that in occult transference, what they will do is they'll take an item
Hmm.
from the house, from the experiencer, from the person,
Okay.
and they'll replace it with something. And so what it does is it creates a connection between the practitioner and between the individual they're targeting.
So is it that the practitioner's holding on to an object that the
Yeah.
experiencer had for some
Yes.
reason?
Yes. And this is all at least this model seems to be centered around ritual magic,
Interesting.
which would play back into the idea, yeah, right? Yeah, okay. Why is it that in 1962, during a UFO abduction, they were made to drink ounces of blood, of their own blood, the experiencer? And you know what I mean? And so it's this is why it's like, okay, are they demons? Well, we need to examine that,
Okay.
right? Because they're not fitting that bill right now. They're
Right.
transcending that. And so there are nuances and interconnectivities here. But my point, I don't want to ramble here, but my point is that whatever we're dealing with, it seems like every time we turn the corner, it seems to be some form of sorcery or magic. And it's not just that. The Collins elite in the 50s, they were performing experiments.
Okay.
And one of their experiments included going to England and taking, because we're talking about England, right? They were taking soil samples from real authentic crop circles. In the
Okay.
soil samples themselves, they discovered cellular anomalies and an energy signature.
Okay.
They documented them. They recorded the data set. They moved from that area into their laboratory, and they have samples of soil samples around them. They
Okay.
began to read incantations. And the phenomenon manifested. After it manifested, they took those soil samples, put
Okay.
them on a microscope. I got chills, my friend. The same cellular anomaly in the very same energy signature. Now, when people hear that, they think, okay, Nathaniel's saying that they were performing sorcery on the soil. No, what they were pointing to was the fact that it appears that it is the same source of energy
Okay.
that's working with practitioners and that's causing some, at least some of these crop circles. So the model, at least that I'm working with now, is that there are portions of reality that the phenomenon can simulate.
Okay.
What that means is it could possibly take something and replace that something with someone, and we wouldn't know the difference,
Right.
or vice versa. Someone with something.
Well, and see, that's one of the things that I think people get very scared about hearing about or hearing or just seeing anything about it is when
Mhm.
people talk about they've been abducted or they know they've been abducted, and there's, you know, conversations with people that say, you know, my wife's not my wife anymore. I don't know who she is, but she's not my wife. You know, we've heard this over and
Very good
over and
point.
over again. And it makes you wonder, so how many other species are there that's looking at humans?
Right.
Why are we the guinea pigs that they're trying to check
Oh
out or
yeah.
use in some way? What can they possibly
Strange.
gain from being around us?
Well, I think it would suggest that we are the most ignorant about ourselves, and that there is potentiality within our species that we're not being told about. It's not like there's, okay, hey, listen, by the way, this is how you do it, step by step, right? It's
Right.
okay, we're going to raise your consciousness. Okay, but why are you probing me?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? These are like the most obvious questions in my mind. But again, the simulation hypothesis does play a role in this, in that, again, to introduce a simulant so as to moderate your perception of reality. I don't want you to know. And we're thinking, okay, disclosure. Hold on. Hold on. It doesn't make any sense. It's not, yeah, it's incompatible with the data set we're collecting. And
Right.
so moving along this line of thinking here, we have case studies in the medieval periods where, especially Middle Ages rather, where um, husbands were waking up in the middle of the night
Hmm.
and they would roll over and they would think their wife is with them.
Hmm.
And then, so, okay, it's my wife. Okay, whatever. They go to the restroom, get a glass of water, go back to bed, fall asleep. The next morning, the wife tells them, yeah, baby, I got to tell you something. Some entity took me out of the bed last night. Stimulants. Well, what time was it? Oh, it was about 1:30. Well, I got up at 1:35. You were still there. No, I wasn't. That was not me. Who was that? That's when demonologists started realizing, right? Okay, you want to talk about a simulant? This is they kind of said, they not kind of, but they actually said it was a familiar spirit because they didn't know how to quantify it. Right?
Right.
This is just some apparition that took on the appearance of my wife.
Right.
Meanwhile, my wife is somewhere completely different. And so this again, this follows the line of thinking, right? Like now we're going into the UFO abduction phenomenon where certain experiencers have been threatened with replacement.
Interesting. Really? Tell me
Yeah,
about
same
that.
phenomenon. So yeah, and Dr. Carla Turner is one of her case studies. Uh, she details an account. She's abducted. They're trying to perform experiments on her, and she's not cooperating. I refuse. You're violating my personal space. What you're
Right.
doing, I don't like, whatever. Well, yeah. And so they told her, well, listen, look over there. And she looked over, and there was a copy of her. Stimulant.
Okay.
Stimulant. Laying on a metal table. And they
Okay.
told her in no uncertain terms, if you don't do what we want you to do, we will kill you. We'll stem that back as you. And here again, perception management. No one in your family will know it's not you. So
Freak.
when I hear trickles of rumors. Oh well, they're hybrids walking among us. Absolutely. Well, they look like humans. Absolutely. And what this also implies is that not everybody who came back actually returned.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's
Unfortunately.
still fascinating though, because we live in such a busy life, and this, just talking about this stuff seems so removed from reality.
Mhm.
It doesn't, until you're somebody or you've met someone that's an experiencer. And I've met experiencers enough that nothing surprises me anymore. I mean, I
Mhm.
guess, yes, I do get surprised some, but it's amazing how much we don't understand. And it's
Right.
amazing how much stuff is right next to us. And this has been proven in science over and over again, that when you're not used to something, you tend to not see it. You actually block it out. Things can be happening right next to you, and day-to-day life stuff can be happening right next to you. And because
Mhm.
it's not part of your current understanding, you just don't see it because it's not something you know. Your brain
Mhm.
kind of filters it out. And so it
Right.
makes sense to me. It's completely plausible to me that someone could go through an experience and people around them would have no idea. They'd have no clue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they don't have the ability to access some of those memories. And I
Right.
think there could be a great many explanations for why that is the case. Specifically speaking, like you have trauma responses where some individuals, depending on how traumatic the experience is, they split.
Mm.
And when they
Yeah.
come back, their brain, it's too painful for their brain
Right.
to conceptualize. And so when they tell you what happened, not at all what happened. It's just their brain's telling them a different story in order to cope. And
Right.
so that may also explain why we've had case studies where, they get abducted or they're visited by an entity, and there is a disconnect between what actually occurred to them
Right.
and the story they're telling. And
Right.
that's where memory regression comes in. And you start, like even Ted Rice's case. Okay, yeah, what was it? Well, it was some entity that did these things. And
Right.
so somewhere there's in between the gap of the story and the trauma begins to really affect the body. Then the
Right.
body has its own story. So yeah, there could be many explanations. Um, but there's also a thought that I've had that it comes from Bob Lazar, some of his research and some of mine as well, in how some of these beings in possessions, they turn parasitic, they wear people.
Okay.
Not just I'm commandeering your body and your conscious, I'm wearing you. I'm
Okay.
looking through your eyes. And when we hear of cases of experiencers where the phenomenon has complete total access over them,
Hmm.
where they're abducted and the avatar is confusing what they're doing with soul as if they're doing it to the body. What do I mean by that? Well, how many times have we heard? This is fascinating nuance about it. Okay, well, they're doing these things to me. They're trying to educate me,
Hmm.
and yet when they're all said and done, they look at me and like, okay, you're not going to remember this. Why? Is it possible to talk to the avatar, not the soul inside?
Hmm.
And so, if in fact some of these individuals do have, and they are hybrid, let's just say that, then it would
Okay.
make sense as to why they're educating that part of them. And the avatar itself is not aware. It's not supposed to be aware. And then they get back, and there is this war, right, where they remember some of it, but none of like it's weird. It's a whole other show. But yeah, but the parasitic species. That's one thing I lectured on at the Awakening on the Molters, where the phenomenon is symbiotic, and then it can turn parasitic. And what I'm afraid of is that religiosity and dogmatism has hijacked possession research where it's kind of characterized it. Oh, it's horns and hooves. And it's almost an oversimplification of that phenomenon because we have possessions that actually lead to pregnancies, but they're never talked about. And that's one of the reasons I've kind of broken away from just strictly studying demonology. Because if that has been monopolized, whatever the word, monopolized, in commercialized by religion, I would ask myself, why is it possible that they're the ones, right, structuring that so we don't really see what's actually occurring? That possession's not horns and hooves, it's actually a replication of species.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's interesting too because I've seen enough things about different alien connections and people that have actually experienced light beings that come to visit them. And there was a story I saw not too long ago about a gentleman who supposedly had sex with a female alien, and she had white hair and extremely pale eyes and was very beautiful, and she protected him from some kind of alien attack, and then ended up coming back to him and making a baby with him. And years later, this other tall gray alien showed up with a child that had his eyes with white hair.
There we go.
And the child was there to just meet him, I guess, and he to meet
Yeah.
her. And there was this incredible exchange, but he said he knew instantly that it was his daughter just by looking at her. He never saw the female alien again that he had sex with, but it was like he had this experience with this child and this gray alien that it was like, she can't stay, but we know that you were wondering what happened and we wanted you to have some answers. You
Right.
made a baby and you're okay and she's okay, but she can't stay with you. It was very weird. But it was very concise. It was this very short little experience the guy had. And it was like he said it answered questions he'd had. He had been thinking about it constantly. And somehow he felt, and he couldn't prove it, but he felt like he was connected to the alien after being with her, that there was some contact connection there. And so it didn't make sense to him why they had a kid together and why he never saw her again. None of it made sense. But in the initial experience, he was out in the woods, he was looking for Bigfoot, and had rocks thrown at him and some other things, and then suddenly there was all this noise and he felt like he was under attack, like he was going to get killed or something was going to happen to him. And then she showed up and stopped it all. It was just a weird story, and it was like a story, but it had an interesting ending, and I couldn't understand. Okay, so why did they bother to show him the kid? Why?
Yeah, that's now. There are case studies of that kind in succubi literature, where one specific case study, a young man, um, they did the same thing. Okay, right? Some entity copulated with him. Next thing he knows, they're giving him a child. He's holding it. This is succubi literature, and his testimony was like, "Okay, I'm a virgin," and he said, "So I've never been with anyone."
Right.
And his question was, how can I be a father and a virgin at the same time? So now we're looking at immaculate conception,
Right.
and, which they've been doing now for centuries. So again, but now when I look at this at a macro level, and I say to myself, why are there so many similarities? Not the mass, not the archetype, but the behavioral patterns, even down to the rituals, down to the incantations. Is it possible that we're dealing with a sealer intelligence? This particular theory has been controversial. Some people agree with it. I've been told I've gone with the fairies, right? But
Okay.
some of the literature I've compiled from Northern Syria, from the earliest accounts of altar building, the phenomenon had weaponized demonology,
Mhm.
weaponized it. In other words, if you don't do what I want to do, I'm going to haunt you.
Okay.
And so it was. a deployment, the secondary consequence of disobedience was the deployment of what we're now calling demonology and hauntology.
Interesting.
And so from their ancient worldview, it wasn't one or the other, and that their worldview was that these are merely branches from the same tree, emanating from the same source. And be
Right.
careful, because if you don't do what they want you to do, they can change into that archetype.
Okay.
And so what we're doing is divert. Oh, yeah, well, okay, those are separate phenomena. To them, it wasn't. They
Right.
knew. And so I've taken that into account, because if that is true, then what it's done, it's not only allowed us to believe it's different entities,
Hmm.
it's willfully diversified its identity in our eyes. That would make so much sense, Harley, as to
Yeah.
why in malevolent hauntings, oh, I'm a demon. Until you trace the bloody footprints back to the historical record.
Right.
No, you're not. You're playing the role of what? It's weaponizing archetypes.
Right.
And if anything, our ancestors tried to warn us of that. Be mindful, be wary, because
Yes.
it will step into those roles,
Right.
and as a way of disciplining us. So then now we have to go into other case studies of malevolent hauntings and say, where's the altar? Do you have any history in the bloodline
Hmm.
of a practice? I have one individual that emailed me the other day. She's dealing with it right now, my friend, right now, where her father was a practitioner,
Hmm.
and he's dead now. And she's asking me, there's an entity here. I can't tell if it's my father or not. I'm leaning towards it being the entity that had molded him into being a practitioner.
Oh, sure. Of
Right.
course. That totally would make sense.
And so it's
Absolutely.
weaponizing that archetype to get them right back into alignment.
So
So
I have a
with that,
question for you.
yeah.
10 years ago, when you were newer at all this,
Mhm.
what do you wish you had known then that you know now?
Um, when to stop researching, because, and very few people, if any, know this, but not even 10 years ago, in 2017, I was assaulted, and I was unconscious for an hour and a half. I don't remember the event. I just remember going around the corner, my phone dying. And so at that point, I woke up. I had a crack down my head.
Wow.
Um, it was wild. So yeah, but thankfully, a homeless woman had a cell phone. It's my last minutes on my cell phone, so she called the cops. Anyways, I had to go to
Where
speech
was this
therapy.
at?
This
Where
is
were
when? I'm sorry, when or where?
where were you at when this
Oh,
happened?
this is in downtown
Okay.
Dayton, Ohio. But so I had to go to speech therapy and to go to physical therapy. When I would close my eyes, I'd hit the floor. Boom. Yeah. So I was having really bad neurological issues, and the worst part about it was going back to my favorite authors, reading notes that I completely forgot. So I had to rebuild my research in as a researcher from square one. And I believe a part of why that happened is because I was getting too close.
Okay.
I was spending like 8 or 9 hours a day researching this and writing notes. And I'd call my dad, like, hey, listen, this is what I think's going on, right? Forming my theory. Um, I think that would have saved me a lot of heartache. Whereas now I've been able to become more sensitive. If I get too close and the veil bends too much, I'll have that overwhelming feeling where, okay, I'm in their wheelhouse now. I need to pull back. And that took nuance from me,
Right.
because yeah, there's a measure of sensitivity there. And at some point thankfully, I was able to reach out to some of the gentlemen I mentioned in England and say,
Right.
you guys experience this? Absolutely.
Oh, so they felt that same, they've had that same type of experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's, yeah, if you get too close, again, the phenomenon is managing perception.
Right.
And yeah, if you get too close to not the archetypes, not the masks,
Mhm.
you get close to the proto intelligence itself, it will push you back. And I've had that. There was one time I was researching fetal magic in Mesopotamia because I believe it has a connection to the missing fetus syndrome as well.
Okay.
And was reading an academic paper about that subject. Anyways, I'm in the weeds of it, and I'm writing all these notes down and making these connections. And in the heat of the moment, I felt it. This chill came over me.
Oh,
And then a couple hours later, I got two different emails from two different experiencers saying that my guides wanted me to tell you they'll be waiting for you when you die. Not just that. This happened about 6 months ago. There's an experiencer that used to work with Dr. Carla Turner when she was alive, but he's been following my research now, and he's been sharing it, like all of my lectures and interviews, sharing it with people from his work, and they're following and all. It's really, really cool. Awesome guy. He was awesome. Um, but he went into a dream, just like one of his old abduction experiences, and it became.
hmm.
And he said, Andrew, researching Nathaniel Gillis. Stop it. Don't even mention his name to people. Then I get the message, hey, Nathaniel, this is what is happening. So there's a reason why I'm single, right? There are just things that I've had to structure my life around
No, I
my
get it.
research. It's too much. It's too much leverage.
It's a lot to deal with. And that's the thing I want, public service announcement. So whatever you're interested in,
Mhm.
whatever field of research, whether it's UFOs, whether it's talking to aliens, whether it's talking to ghosts or just Bigfoot research, there is a sense among researchers of caution. There is a sense of strong curiosity, and people are very driven to get answers. But I also can say that I know that there's a sense of respect and patience that you'll get your answers in the right time, in the right place, when you're supposed to. I have some friends that are very vigilant Bigfoot researchers, and they have told me numerous times that they know that they were protected from something bad happening because they were steered
Right.
away from an area that they were headed into. So
Right.
I feel like the warning that and the discomfort that you felt to stop, I think that happens to everybody doing research at one level or
Yep.
another. I feel like that's very natural that you're going
Mhm.
through that because I
Yep.
feel like it's instinctual to preserve ourselves. And so
Yeah.
something in your psyche or something around you is helping you to be aware of when to stop. So maybe that's a great skill that you've developed over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it didn't come cheap. I mean, it took me a lot of, it caused me a lot of heartache, right? Trying to figure out, okay, why did this happen?
Right. Sure.
I can tell you, even when I was with my ex, the phenomenon was manifesting in the bedroom, like it would, like I woke up one night from a nightmare. It's in my nightmare.
Right.
To wake up, it's still there. That is an important part of my newest research is the combination of us projecting the archetype and the
Okay.
phenomenon meeting us halfway and wearing that mask.
Mm.
And so in between us projecting it, because upon first blush, I thought it was my ex at the time. She was 5'2", she had long black hair. If you would have taken her, put her in a dark room, featureless, you couldn't see her face, but you could see the shape. That's what
Right.
she looked like. And I'm
Okay.
thinking, why is that the case? And so I can't go too much into it because I will do another show and I'll we'll talk about it then. But
Right.
what I'm starting to do is collect evidence suggesting that some of these shadow figures, at least the image they're inhabiting,
Right.
not the independent entity.
Right.
Yeah, but is coming from us. We are projecting a part of the mask it's wearing, and that would explain the symbiotic nature.
Hmm.
Why is it Jesus, right, of the West? It's the Swedish Presbyterian. Well, why isn't it the first century Jesus? This is why it's important to connect it to the historical record. If it is that person, right, it'll be apples to apples. You won't have an inconsistency.
Right.
Whereas the experiencers, okay, it's blonde hair. Okay, right. So that's why I'm thinking, why would it not look like someone else? Why would
Right.
it look like Ellie? Unless it's wearing that archetype.
Right.
It's deep stuff, but I'm having fun with it.
That's cool. So, what do you what are you most proud of at this point in time in the research that you've done?
It's a new field of, it's called Necronetics. I basically narrowed the dream demon and incubus down to a transfer of consciousness from one body to another. And
Okay.
we're calling that new body the missing fetus in it. That is another um, case of occult transference where the
Okay.
practitioner, yeah, they, and I'll go into more detail, of course, but I can. But essentially, all of the behavioral pathologies are present. The dream
So,
demon, why is it a dream demon? Because they're inducing you into a dream.
right. So, just for people listening, explain what type of person is or what is a person having when they're going in with this type of experience. What's happening to them?
So, what we have though, with respect to these characteristics, okay, let me say this. Usually it's the female and she's being visited by an entity. In most cases, she's being induced into the dream.
Okay.
And in this dreamscape, this virtual reality scenario, the entity manifests. The reason they're in this dreamscape is because this entity is trying to bypass her ability to determine reality.
Okay.
And so when it interfaces with these experiencers, in many cases, it will wear the mask of a deceased loved one, a
Hmm.
former lover. I had one case study where this is incredible, but the woman was in bed next to her sleeping husband when the phenomenon had convinced her that she was copulating with her husband. She knew he was asleep,
Whoa.
but they paused the memory. Well, I'll go to this case study and I'll kind of extrapolate it and really go into that. So, yeah, this particular case study, uh, they were in bed and he's sleeping. Next thing you know, he comes to her. He walks up to the side of the bed. It's my husband. She said, now I'm going into this weird woozy feeling, and now it's like I'm in a dream,
Okay.
and I am becoming physical. You can edit that out. I don't know. Copulating with my husband, and then afterwards, he's back on the side of the bed looking at me, and she said that's when I realized that there were certain facial proportions, this disproportion, that they didn't look identical to the husband.
Okay.
She started realizing, wait, there's something wrong here.
Something's wrong here. That would
Right.
be
She's coming
spooky as
to
hell.
herself.
Right.
Yeah. And she said that's when it smiled and it dematerialized into a smoke and then just flew out into the hallway. Then she comes back to herself. She's got all of her faculties. She leans over and realizes, wait a minute, I knew my husband was here the whole time. Why would I be again? Perception management.
Right.
Well, it just, how many times have we heard that? Well, it made me feel like it was love and light. Exactly. And if we're dealing with an intelligence that can
Yeah.
manipulate our own emotions,
Yeah, that's spooky.
how can we determine if those are organic, if they're
Right.
real, or if it's a projection of the phenomenon?
Right.
So, but yeah, so it'll mask itself. I had a case study in India one time where the entity was manifesting as 7 different lovers to the same experience.
Oh.
And she got a hold of me saying, "Listen, I heard one of your lectures. This is disturbing, and it's." And this is again when we do research. the pathologies are very similar, if not the same. And so what she was saying was, listen, the bruisings, they're all the same.
Right.
And it's always want to do the same thing with me.
Hmm.
But it was working her like a safe. Okay, I'm going to manifest as Eric. Will Eric work for you? No. Okay, cool. Goes back. Okay, now I'm Aaron. Does Aaron work? And to be even more specific,
Wow.
the incarnations it manifested first were the men that she did not make wear protection. Again, not the mask. What's the agenda? Which would increase the probability of conception.
Right. Crazy.
So when I looked at that and I started again collecting these cases of occult transference in history, that's when I discovered what I call necronetics. And I'm going to introduce this whole theory through a book. It'll
Right.
be volume one, and then I'm going to hopefully either write a novel of fiction on it and then
Okay.
have that in a movie so we can kind of educate the masses without, at least they can go home and think, okay, at least it's not real. And then they'll be like, oh my God, it's Nathaniel. Okay, it is real, right? It's kind of messed up. It's really
Right.
jacked up.
Right.
But what I realized was that all of these case studies, they had markers, inducing the dream states. Some of these experiencers were forcibly ingesting potions, and they would fall asleep afterwards, and that's when the phenomena would interface with them. And so I looked at that, and then I followed these bloody footprints of what I would think is a serial killer, right, or a predator
Right.
at least. And then you go into some of the occult literature where it's like, okay, it's not just they're inducing them in their dream states. Now we're in the debut phenomenon, where the dream demon is not just a dream demon; it's now impregnating the women. They're having pregnancies.
That's
In
spooky.
that possession and pregnancy, they were both occurring in the same experiencer. And so this is why, for those who haven't watched my lecture at the Awakening, go to UAMN TV. You'll see I'm in one of the videos. It's called the Molters, a species within. Because what they were doing is they were self-replicating by implantation and impregnation, implanting their own consciousness and into the fetus they were impregnating them with. And guess where we've seen that? We've
Where?
seen that in occult transference with sorcerers.
Interesting.
Yeah, self-replication. Why? Because it's a replication of self. It's the replication of the self of the practitioner.
Okay.
Um, with these particular case studies, you would have the practitioner who, if he was dying, there's the incubus motif. They would induce during demon. They would induce their female victim to a dream state, bypass her instinctual awarenesses, and consent, if you will. So it's not all lovers and light, but
Correct.
bypass consent, inseminate with a fetus. And I found the actual incantation, Holly,
Oh my
where the
gosh.
practitioner is conversing with the fetus. This is my body. This is my body. Get out. Get out. And so at that point, even in the 16th century, what we're seeing now is when the phenomenon removed the consciousness,
Hmm.
it also took the fetus itself, both of them. So this is what I'm saying when I believe some of these entities are liminal. They are practitioners. And who are they worshiping? Who are they
Right.
serving? And that's pretty much the cutting edge of where I'm at personally.
That's amazing. That's incredible, Nathaniel. And I can't wait to hear this book. So you're going to have to keep me posted about this book that you're
Yeah,
going to get yourself into.
I will. I will. And who knows what's going to happen? I want to trademark Necronetics because,
You
believe it or
should.
not, there are research because it's necromancy and genetics.
Right.
That's why it's Necronetics. But yeah. So, anyways, I don't want to ramble, but thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Thank you for coming today. And I put just on the screen here, if you want to reach Nathaniel, you can email him at njgillis, GILLIS, at yahoo.com for those that are
Yes.
listening. And Nathaniel, thank you for coming on again. It
Thank
is
you.
always a pleasure to see you and talk to you and hear what's going on.
Likewise.
it's a blast to see what's going on with you. But I can't wait to see what else you discover, because I have a feeling that in the next 2 years a lot more is going to come forward. So that'll be
I hope
amazing.
so. I hope so.
Yeah,
Holly,
I think so.
you're one of my favorites. Thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to our next show.
Yes, thank you. This is Holly from Holly's Pandorium saying thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.